So one thing a lot of younger comics want to know is how to get out on the road. And there's so many parts to that question, but one is getting feature work, opening for other comics. So I talked to Stuart Thompson, a comedian from LA, and Caitlin Peluffo, a comedian from New York, about their experiences going out on the road, opening for other people, as well as starting to bring openers out themselves. Enjoy.
I'm Stuart Thompson. I've been doing comedy. I started almost 14 years ago, and I'm still enjoying it. So I'll take that. Uh, but some people ask like when you started versus when you started like actually treating it like a job. And I will say I started treating it like a job probably when I moved to LA, which was just over 11 years ago. So
Nice. My name is Caitlin Peluffo. I've been doing it for 9 years, and I started in New York. And as soon as I started, I became obsessed. Um, so I would say when I started treating it like a job was probably as soon as I started. um, yeah, in New York, you have that luxury, I feel like. So, yeah, that's what I did.
Yeah, nice. All right. So my first question is, when do you remember the first time you went out on the road featuring for someone? Or
Ooh,
is that lost to
hmm.
the mists of time?
I mean,
Yeah.
featuring. I don't know. I hosted for a long time.
Hmm.
Um, I did bananas in Hasbrook Heights. That was my first hosting gig, and it was for Gary Goldman.
Nice.
And I hit so much traffic that I was almost late. And I was freaking out. I was like crying in the car. And then I got there, and the woman was so mean. She was but I understand. I showed up
Yeah.
5 minutes before the show. And then she went over to Gary, who also came in late, and was like, "Was there traffic?" And he was like, "Yeah, it was pretty bad." And I was like, "Thank you, Gary." So I'll always
Oh,
be indebted to Gary for saving my bananas comedy career.
And corroborating your story.
Yeah,
yes.
exactly. I was like, "Oh, thank God."
Mhm.
So,
Yeah, I know there's definitely some really early just like opening gigs because the comedy store and Tommy, the talent coordinator at the time, would send me down to do like the employee opening spot. They would have like four comics that just would usually tag team.
Mhm.
And I remember that happened in Halloween weekend 2012.
Mhm.
And I was the headliner was Eric Griffin. But the first time I featured for someone, I had done well in the San Francisco International Comedy Competition in 2015. I got third, and I was like, oh, maybe I can do the road. I had been at the comedy store as a door guy for a few years. And so I just started asking people. I was like, maybe yeah, closed mouths don't get fed. Let's just ask. And if, a lot of people said no, but a few people said yes. And the first time I was featuring for someone was I flew to St. Louis with Steve Renazzisi to feature for him at the then new Helium.
hmm,
And I was like, oh, we get to fly somewhere. And that's when I learned about, never checking bags as a comic.
yeah.
I
Did you
think
show up with luggage and Steve was like, "What are you doing?"
no, I had the wherewithal to text him just saying like, "Hey, do you check bags?" Because I know some people like bring a lot of merch on the road with them, so they have to
Mhm.
check a bag or they have it shipped to the club. And I asked him, he's like, "Hey, should I be checking a bag?" And he's like, "Yeah, I mean, if all those dildos won't fit in your carry-on, I mean, just go for it." And I was like, "Okay,
Got it.
rules of the road,
Yeah.
noted."
Yeah. Don't bring dildos. Okay.
Yeah, they take up a lot of space.
They do.
Yeah, I can't remember when I featured for someone.
Mhm.
I don't know. But hosting, I remember that distinctly because I almost shit my pants. But
But I assume the show went fine once you actually got there.
no, it went terribly. Because I went up there and I was all frantic and worried, and then I
Mhm.
go to go on, and back then they were a clean cut club. Like you couldn't say so as they're playing the music, which is wild Bananas, if you've ever done it, it's insane music. It's like, welcome to Bananas and blah, 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 blah. Like, it's
Oh,
crazy.
great.
No.
Yeah. And there were bananas on the stage. Like, they
Mhm.
would put fresh bananas on the stage every weekend with the monkey grabbing the bananas. Anyway, but they were playing all this, and the woman, Denise, who still works there, who's very nice, but she came up to me and she was just like, okay, so you know the rules, right? And I was like, what rules? She was like, you can't say shit, fuck, da, da, da. And she literally listed all the things you couldn't say as an opener. And I didn't know that. And so I was literally walking up on stage being like, well, I have to get rid of that joke, that joke, that joke, that joke. And I think I pulled it out by doing crowd work. But it was it was a mess. Yeah, it was not great.
Yeah,
Um,
there is that added pressure of being the host where they typically want the host to be a little more, I don't know if it's like just clean cut, but I feel like they almost want the host to not be like an existing person, just like
Mhm.
almost like the default character when you're starting to play a video game and you haven't quite dressed them up yet with personality or
Mhm.
accoutrement. Yeah, it's I've noticed that sometimes with hosting, there's a little bit more added pressure, or you got to read, a litany of things that the club has, business ties with. You got to promote some, other weekends. You got to,
Mhm.
you're almost like a more of an employee, like a door staff
Yeah.
person than a
The
comedian.
worst is when they give you the sheet and they're like, just casually mention these things. And it's like 3 paragraphs long.
Yeah.
You're like, casually mention when?
Yeah.
By the time you're done, you're like, okay, I got 3 minutes left.
Yeah. Time
Here we
time to
go.
read time to read some essays.
Yeah,
Yeah, exactly. Just casually, I would like to say, the Bananas LLC is not responsible for
Yeah.
any. Yeah.
It's crazy. But
Well, so were you able, so you went up there with Gary, were you able to start hosting there regularly for other people? Had like Bananas asked you, or had Gary asked you, or how did that
Bananas
kind of
had
go about?
asked me.
Okay.
Yeah, I got booked by a guy, just a guy who does road stuff specifically. And so I'd worked with him. And so I got booked there a lot. And then I started to feature there. And yeah, now they're run by Helium. So
Mm.
maybe one day I'll headline and it'll all come full circle. We'll
Mhm.
see.
Back
But
at
it ain't today.
Bananas.
So
You're like, Denise, I'm saying shit this time.
yeah, I know. I've earned the right to say shit.
I don't need no rules.
Yeah, it was crazy. Oh God. Now looking back on it, I was just like, now I'm like, oh, they didn't really care. They like if I had said shit, or they
Right.
just didn't want me to be like, my pussy's so flappy, they just didn't want that right away.
Yeah.
And
Which is too
now
bad because that is your most popular joke.
yes, 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 yes. That's my bread and butter, baby.
Yeah, the
But
crowd's like, how flappy is it?
exactly.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, I'll show you. And then yeah,
That's the
that's
whole
what they were
point.
trying to avoid. Any of
Right.
my jokes would
Mm.
have been fine, but I was like, whoa.
Yeah.
But hindsight, as they say.
Yeah. And Stuart, you kind of said, you're like, closed mouth doesn't get fed. You just started
Mhm.
kind of letting it be known. Is that how you got most of your early opening? Did you, were there some people you started going out with regularly? How did that kind of evolve?
Yeah, so that is still how I get most of my work is just playfully haranguing people. And I don't, I mean, I've had some moments where like people have advocated for me, but I've also oftentimes had to like say, "Hey, could you advocate for me in this moment?" Because it doesn't seem like I'm going to get any traction if this
Mhm.
does. Um, I'm sure that's the case for plenty of other people, but for me, yeah, for some reason I just kind of had this like little switch in confidence where I was like, I guess I just got to ask people. And then I would have different people would take me out for like 2 weekends or 3 weekends
Mhm.
over the course of the next like 2 or 3 years. So like I did a couple weeks with Ren It's Easy and like did open for him at like a college gig, and I opened for Eliza on a couple of gigs. There would usually be like one that was kind of like close to LA. And then once they realized I wasn't like, I was like a decent person to be around, I could maybe go on a gig that was further away. I was like,
Yeah.
okay, if I took a flight with this person and like stayed in the same hotel, it wouldn't be a problem. Uh, and then I did a couple weekends with Bobby Lee, and then I still occasionally will do guest spots, but I started doing some gigs with Steve Trevino and trying to think who else. And then that kind of would spawn into like, oh, I get to meet the people at the club or meet the people in that city, and then I get to, realize what else is happening. And then sometimes that would lead to me getting paired with someone by the club or but yeah, but there's sometimes where it's like I don't know when I'm going to go back to this part of Texas or this part of Missouri. So it's like, okay, well, maybe this is just a one-time thing. But now I have relationships with some clubs, especially like clubs in Northern California where I'm from. They do a really nice job of trying to pair all the talent, host, feature, and headliner to make sure it's a cohesive and diverse look and voices and all that stuff.
Nice.
Yeah.
That is-
Where are you from in California?
I was born in San Francisco, and I grew up all over the Bay Area. I lived in Marin for a little bit, and I grew up in this town in the East Bay called Piedmont.
Yeah, I know Piedmont. I'm from San Bruno.
Oh, San Bruno. Okay, great.
Yeah,
So,
that's
yeah,
exciting. I
yeah,
love to find another Bay Area person.
yeah. There's a special connection. To
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah,
There's a
we're having a rough week, but it's good.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. Whew.
yeah, South Bay's having a rough week.
Yeah.
But yeah, I lived in the Bay until I finished college and I started comedy in college. So just
Oh, nice.
kind of, like a phantom just driving across the Bay Bridge into the city to
Yeah.
perform at some bar that I was too young to be in.
Yeah. Mhm.
But if it was a gay bar, then maybe it was like the bartender be like, I'll allow it.
Yeah.
And
Like, who, me? Thank you.
Oh
Yeah,
God, yeah, fresh-faced young Stuart. Ooh,
Mhm.
they
I
must have
mean,
eaten you up. I remember what an adorable, naive, hopeful person you were when you were that young.
Yeah, no, it was that time was not long before I met you, Amy, and I look like nothing's ever happened to me now. So
I
if
mean,
you can
that's true.
picture me 11 years ago, I got getting hired at the Comedy Store as like a 21-year-old.
He was so
oh,
sweet and innocent.
Yeah,
wow. I mean,
yes,
that's amazing. I wish I could have started that young. That
yeah.
seems so
I think it's a mixed
good.
blessing
Yeah.
Yeah.
because I think people who I've known who have started when they were older, they definitely had. I think it was much more clear to them who they were,
Mhm.
and so they can, just being able to sort of like turn on that personality was a lot easier. I've spent my entire adult life being a comedian,
Mhm.
and I don't know if I would always advertise that to 100% of the people who say I want to do comedy. It's like
Yeah.
maybe go do a thing.
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah, that's
may-
true.
Yeah, have some life first.
Yeah.
possibly. Yeah, but I mean, if you truly believe that it is a calling of some kind, then there's only so much control we have over, when it finds you.
Mhm.
Was that the same for you? Did you find, you had to, so you were working with that guy in Bananas, but in terms of, generally as you started going on the road with people at first, was it about, putting that out there, asking people? Did you have happy accidents? How did you kind of come around to
Um,
find the people who found you?
I was very lucky. I started doing festivals about 2 years in, and I lost so much money, but I did all these festivals, and it ended up being great because they were all run by different comedy clubs around the country, and they would have industry come. And so when I would do these festivals, I was usually one of like 5 women in the whole fest.
Yeah.
And so they're at that time they were all looking for female either hosts or features. And so I was like, I'm a lady and I'm nice, So you do the festival, you make friends and stuff.
Yeah.
And so I was able to meet a lot of headliners, a lot of bookers, a lot of club owners through those festivals, which was great, which was very lucky. And then I would just I like to think I'm an email queen. I send a lot of emails to clubs. I wouldn't bother. I wouldn't reach out to headliners because that intimidated me a lot. So I would just reach out to the clubs, um, and that's how I would get most of my work. I would either host first and then feature, because when I started, people weren't bringing someone to clubs, and then I met headliners that way, and then I would work with them for a few other clubs, and then I would get in through those. So it was like a snowball effect. So I was very lucky that way. In terms of the people that I open for now, they just saw me and either at a festival or at the cellar, and they and then I would get wrecked by someone else at the cellar. Be like, is she a crazy person? No, okay, we can, And I was like, thank you, yeah. But pretty much everything I've ever gotten was either through festivals or through other comedians. So I feel very, very grateful for that. But no management or anything like that. That's what I say to that.
Well, okay, and you mentioned being intimidated to ask. Stuart, you had said you kind of had a switch flip. Like, so that's the thing I hear from tons of younger comics of like, oh, I feel weird asking, or I'm scared to ask. Like, do you know what the switch was, Stuart? Like, what made you able to feel comfortable doing that in a way that like could help someone else? Or was it just like one day you woke up and you were like, oh, this makes sense, just do this?
I mean, I guess it was a couple of things. I had started hosting for the Live Nation clubs in the Bay Area, like the Punchlines and Cobb's, the previous year at the beginning of 2015. Like I think between me getting to host my first weekend for the Punchline it was like 4 years after I started like hanging out on Sundays at the San Francisco Punchline. And so I had some road experience, and Tommy had sent me down to La Jolla to do the spots. It would be either like the equivalent of the hosting spot, or I don't think he had quite sent me down to feature there yet. But but I kind of knew the tools of just like, okay, this is just what weekend shows are. Mm-hmm. And then it was really that San Francisco comedy competition, which was for those who are not familiar, it is if you make it all the way through, it is 3 weeks of 4 one-nighters in a row in different places all over California.
Oh, wow.
The fact that it's called the San Francisco Comedy Competition is a real bait and switch, because there's really only one show in San Francisco. And for my year, it was at the Jewish Community Center.
All right.
Which is a big venue. Like it sat several hundred people and it was pretty full. Mm-hmm. But like, there was one weekend, it was the semifinal weekend, the second week. So if you made it they pick 32 people each year, and they do one in Seattle as well. It's the same people. And so if you make it to the second week, that means you were in the top 5 of your group of 16 people. They have 2 preliminary weeks, so they take the best 5 based on this very strange point system that no one can quite figure out, and people would go nuts trying to game out, and just like trying.
Yeah, I don't know why. I'm like, why is that surprising me?
Yeah, people would overthink it all the time. So I was just like, I was 25, and I'm just like, hey, I'm just glad to be here. Let me see if this goes well enough. And but we would do casinos and colleges and small theaters and big theaters and rowdy bars and restaurants. So it was a real mix. So each night you were in a different environment, and you had to figure out how to navigate it. And I am very lazy, so I try to have I want an act that works most places. I don't want to have to keep writing new material for these individual locations. So I had about 15 minutes that I liked, and I think if you have a really solid 15 minutes, you can do well in this competition. And so I made it to the second round. Just to give you an example of how far you would have to go. So the first night was in Escondido, which is near San Diego. And then the next night was in Sacramento, which is a good 400 miles away, maybe 500 miles away. And then the next night was in Livermore, which is like the southeastern Bay Area, right near Altamont, if you're a Stones fan. And that's another 3 hours. And then the last night of that week was in Santa Rosa, which is another 2 hours back towards Sacramento. And each of these shows was the biggest show I had ever done. And it kept topping itself night after night. So Escondido was at the California Center for the Arts, 400 people, like the small room. And then there was and then Sac State was 500 people in this huge auditorium. And then the next night was at the Bankhead Theater in Livermore, 550. And then the last night was Santa Rosa at the Luther Burbank Center, which is where like George Carlin did his last special for HBO. Dana Carvey recorded a special there. The green room has like huge portraits of like Pink and Bill Maher and like Kenny Rogers, these other people. It's bigger than my apartment, the green room. And it's 1,600 people in the venue. So it's like performing in front of the ocean.
Yeah.
Like you watch the laughs kind of roll out and you got to let them roll back in before you can get into the next joke. And so once I could do that and I made it to the finals and I got third, I'm just like, well, if this is what the road really is, just like one night somewhere else, another night somewhere else, go figure out a place to stay, hit up your friends and relatives that live in these different places and, see who's got a couch. I can do this.
Mm-hmm.
So, and, I'm never going to understand what it's like to be a comic of another background or a female comic or anything like that. And all these sort of like the nuances of interactions with people in powerful positions and all that stuff. And, the headliners I happened to ask, were people that I had started to get to know at the store as a door guy. It was just someone they saw frequently. And some of them had actually like said some nice things. Like I remember Bobby saw me host potluck at the store on a Monday. He happened to just be hanging out there. And he said something complimentary about my ability to host. So, and I think he had brought me up on a paid regular night because the comic after him was running late and there was no one else there. So the Comedy Store rule is if you're a door guy and there's no one else there, you get to go up to fill the time. So I don't know. I guess it all just kind of added up in a real, I guess now that I think about it, a more gradual way than I thought it would. But yeah, I mean, I was just like, I want to make a living at this, and the road is where most comedians make their living if they don't have a TV show that they're actively writing on or acting on. So, now do I open for most of those comedians now? Not really, because we're in the age where people have their guy or they have their gal in that region of the world. Some headliners are very generous with who they bring along. And so they, I don't take it personally, by the way. I want to make sure that's super clear. I just haven't found a headliner where it's like, that guy's my buddy.
Yeah.
And that person's always going to take me no matter what. I'm in some ways grateful for that, because I think being a terminal opener can be a set of gilded handcuffs. Mm-hmm. But it's a nice gig for a while.
Yeah. Well, okay, let me reverse that, because you guys are now in a place where you can headline shows. If someone were to approach you and express an interest in opening for you, would you find that annoying, or how would you want them to say that to you?
It doesn't annoy me. It especially with women, when they message me, I try and make sure I message right away, and be like, I'm so glad you reached out. Don't make it weird. It's not weird, like just be very encouraging with that, even if I can't have them. I'm at a place where I can't pay anyone extra, because I'm making very little money on these headlining gigs. And so I have to be like, hey, I can't afford to bring you, or I have a few friends that I'm like, if you ever want to do this city or get into this club, let me know. And if I work it, just ask me. And then I do that with my friend Jill Wiener a lot. She just wants to be on the road and do the time.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, you will make no money. Is that okay? And she goes, yes. And I say, okay, then you can come with me, because it's nice to have a friend, but I do feel that guilt of not being able to pay them, because
Mhm.
I've been featuring for so long that I know that you don't make a lot of money.
Mm.
And so I encourage them, get merch, sell it, do what you got to do. Um, and I like to have, I prefer women to open for me, because if we have to share a hotel room, it's less awkward.
Mm.
Although I have done it, Peter Ravello and I have shared a hotel room and it was fine. But yeah,
All
yeah,
right.
we'll always have Louisville, Peter. But it's one of those things where it's like I always try and encourage women, because a lot of women are afraid to ask, and so I try and be like, yes, you can come with me, please, please, um, and then also I try and bring women or a person of color, because the clubs in the Midwest, especially, they don't really have a lot of women or people of color
Mm.
working their clubs. So a lot of times it's just two, no offense, straight white dudes.
No, no,
And then
I'm
me,
well
which is
aware.
fine. It's always a fine show, but it's um I find I want it. I guess you got to be the change you want to see in the world, I guess, or something
Yeah.
like that. So I try and do that, but sometimes it's hard. Uh, but I never get upset when someone asks me to open. Um, I'm always like, oh, that's. I always get flattered. I was like, you think
Yeah.
I'm doing well? Thank you. It is all a facade. I'm taking a hit doing this headlining show, so. But it's usually that if you're willing to lose money, come and open for me. So yeah.
Yeah, I've had a couple people ask me at certain moments, and I'm really just starting to like headline one nighters and put out the feelers to headlines weekends at smaller clubs. But if I have the ability to take someone, then I totally will. Ideally, I mean, I totally get why current headliners take people that are their buddy, because the road is lonely.
Mhm.
And I do like I enjoy being alone.
Mhm.
But having one friend in the middle of fuck nowhere doing some tavern, it makes it allows you to just like, I think it just allows you to have a better story, when you go to these towns. But yeah, I was talking with a friend of mine who's, I think, about the same level as I am, and he was just expressing an interest in doing the road more because he generally doesn't. And I told him if I have an opportunity to take someone, I totally will. And I definitely would want someone that would complement what I do on stage. I don't, I'm not terribly worried if someone's going to be like, I don't know. I'm not worried about language or anything like that, but I am concerned about being in service of the show. The show is for these people. And I think seeing a show that is all one note, all one gender, all one, ethnicity or race, or one just all one ethos,
Mhm.
that is a boring show. And I see this with shows in town in LA where there's, the people may all look different, but they all are saying the same thing with the same intonation,
Yeah.
whether it's vocal fry or ending every sentence like it's a question, uh, even though it's a declarative statement,
Mhm.
or people who just say or even people who all do one-liners. That's not an interesting show.
Mhm.
So I I want the show. I mean, I kind of learned watching the way the people at the Live Nation clubs in Northern California would book shows, where it'd be like, okay, we'll have a pretty wide variety of people on these shows. Like I opened for um right before Christmas, they had me feature for Kate Willett on two nights, like Tuesday, Wednesday, leading up
Mhm.
to Christmas, and then three shows on like Thursday and Friday, opening for Kevin Kamiya, who's a Filipino comic or Filipino American comic from the South Bay, and opens for Ali Wong a lot. And you know, all the voices were diverse between those two headliners and myself, and also the host. This, her name is Diana Hong. It was all a nice variety. And so I just like variety. If I were to see a show, I would want to see variety. So if I can provide that variety or having some agency in that the show lineup, I totally will.
So you both touched on this a little bit. How much do you see, especially now since the pandemic, a club is providing the host and the opener versus the headliner gets to bring someone with them?
I think it's the headliner brings the feature with them almost always. Yeah. And the host is provided by the club. That's been my experience in the past year. Especially because before I did Corden, I was trying to get so much feature work at these bigger clubs, and I just couldn't get it because everybody was bringing their own feature, which is again fine. I get it. No shade, as they say. But as those kids say,
Ed, is that what they say? Shade?
Like do they all old people?
I know.
We've all had our old people moments on this podcast.
Yeah, it's like that, those kiddos.
Is that what the kids are saying? I did not know that.
Yeah, shade, like in Out of the Sun. Yes. But yeah, and so that's the trend that I've seen. A lot of people just bringing their own features, and now it's like seeing the other side. Now I still feature for some comics, but I don't no longer ask for featuring sets. I ask for headlining for clubs, and it's just now I'm like, well, who should I bring? And but also for certain clubs, I'm not gonna, like, I'm doing Comedy on State in a week and a half, and I'm very intimidated by that club. So I was like, you can bring whoever you want. I'm sorry I'm even there. I mean, just, and that's probably the club that I've had the most people ask me to open for them. And I'm like, I just got to do this first round, guys. I'm so sorry. I don't want to, cause any ruckus. I don't, but I'm sure if they asked me, like, are you sure you don't want to bring someone? I was like, no, that's crazy. That's insane. No. But also if someone's already been booked, I don't want to take work away from someone. So I asked them, oh, have you already booked the feature? If I want to bring someone, if they say no, then I will ask a friend. But if they say yes, then I'm like, I'm not taking work away from anybody, because I know what that feels like. That sucks.
Yeah, the clout thing that you mentioned is real. Because I feel like trust between performer and club manager is I think it's very fraught, no matter how unassuming the act might be. Mm-hmm. Like I think I feel like there's just it's like a tightrope of trust, whereas like mm-hmm. Getting that first weekend is like just showing that you can do the work, mm-hmm. and that people will come and enjoy it, and yes. You'll get along with the staff. There won't be some weird interaction with the server or like with the manager, or just avoiding miscommunications. All that stuff can lead to a manager or club staff to be like, why would we have this person again? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That put a bad taste in my mouth. Mm-hmm. And I feel like I can't say I've lost a bunch of work in that respect, but I'm very aware of it. Mm-hmm. I remember featuring at a club, and the server and I were like, the server just came into the green room. We were just on like different pages, and I don't know what she was bringing in. And I have a little bit of awareness of what I was bringing in, but like, for some reason we just like did not mesh. And it was the first time that it notably happened. And I'm like, in my head, I'm just like, does this mean I'm never coming back here?
Yeah.
And I haven't been back, but I don't know if it's because of that.
Could be any number of reasons.
I've been playfully haranguing the booker.
Yeah. Playfully haranguing. I love that phrase.
Yeah.
I mean, so that brings up a really good question, which is sort of, when you're there as a feature and you're trying to establish a relationship that hopefully will grow into headlining, what are some of the do's and don'ts, and how do you playfully harangue them to follow up afterwards?
Um, well, I mean, the definite do's is don't drink too much.
Mm,
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I mean, I guess that's a don't. Don't drink too much.
yeah.
Yeah.
um, tip, uh, the staff, be respectful, don't blow the light. Um, there's just like, yeah, it's just like basic etiquette. Um, and and then if the headliner gives you instruction, do that instruction, because I've had headliners ask me like, don't do so much crowd work. Sure, okay. Or I have a joke about, like, the first show is always do whatever you want, but then after that I always ask the headliner if they want a cleaner show or a dirty show, or if they have any limitations.
Mm,
And they say, usually 9 times out of 10 they say, do whatever you want, who gives a shit. And I was like, okay. um but I think it's polite to ask the headliner, do you are you any stipulations.
Yeah.
I think that's fair. And then yeah, don't hit on the staff. Don't I mean, that seems crazy, but I don't do that. that and yeah, and just be as respectful as possible. And then I always wait for them to offer, uh the club, for them to say, hey, we'd love to have you back, and be like, oh great, can I get an email, and I'll definitely shoot you guys some dates. uh Other than that, I but again, that's the and then kill, always kill. Don't try new shit in the middle of the thing. Just, if it's your first time there, just do as well as you possibly can.
Yeah, no, that definitely agreed. I'm trying to, I mean, I'm trying to think of what to add there. I've definitely sometimes said like, hey, I'd love to come back.
Mm-hmm.
Just in conversation, like, hey, I had a great time. I think just approaching these weekends with a healthy level of graciousness is always a good energy to put out there
Mm-hmm.
in a room. And yeah, I mean, I don't do a lot of crowd work in general, so I haven't had too much of the like, I mean, I focus on material, and I think that's why I've been able to consistently open for people, because it's like, oh, he's just going to do his thing and we're good.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, and I don't think there's any sense in like trying to make it a competition, because I've heard of weekends where like a feature or a host is like, oh, I blew the next guy out of the water.
Oh.
And it's like, I mean, I'm not saying don't not kill. I'm
yeah.
not saying don't kill. It's like, just go, go do your best. But there's no need to make the show a competition. Like, you've been assigned a role,
Mhm.
go fulfill your role, go be good. Now, if the headliner has trouble following you, then that's something for the club manager to make a decision on. But like, I've never been on. Yeah, I've only had a headliner ask me to not do a certain type of bit once or twice, because it happened to coincide with a topic that they were working on.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, okay. And occasionally the club has asked me to not do a certain type of material. I was opening for a comic who does a lot of impressions, and I do impressions in my act, and I was a last minute fill in. Like, they asked me on a Monday
Oh.
to come perform that weekend, and they said, you can't do any impressions, not even your mom. And I was like, what? But that's, that's what the terms were.
Yeah.
Mm.
So I mean, I think when people are being asked by a club who they want to open for, or if they want to do this gig, they do have agency in it. And I know a lot of comics have this feeling of like, well, I'm not really in a position to say no to anything because I'm trying to get all the work I can. So you can treat it like an exercise. Like, okay, if I do a lot of impressions, can I do a set without having to do any impressions? And I was able to, because the headliner wanted to do a lot of time, like over an hour. So they only had me do 7. So I can do 7 minutes, no impressions.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
But like, but if it's really not something that you think is a good fit, I think people do have agency. But there are some clubs where it's like if you say no to the weekend that they offer, they might not book you again for a year.
Mm-hmm.
I had that happen where I had a previous commitment, and it was something that I had made plans for. And of course, when I make plans for my life, I get tons of requests. Hey, can you do this day that you definitely booked something else for? And it's like, I'm trying to take a trip. I'm trying to trying to do something for me. So I have shit to talk about.
I'm trying to be a human.
I'm trying to be a human. I'm trying to be a good friend. I'm trying to be a good, member of my family. My brother's getting married this, later this year in October, and I've made sure to say like I'm not available when I send out avails. But I have, there's a thing that's lingering in the back of my head that some club is going to ask me is like, hey, can you do the day we know your brother's getting married? Like, it's like, come on. The only other thing I realize I should add is, asking to sell merch.
Oh yeah, that's a good one.
Because as a feature, if you're doing an A club where you're probably getting paid about $500 to $600 over the whole weekend, selling merch really helps make that trip more feasible. So pretty much every comic I've worked with has had no problem with me selling merch. But I do know that I've talked to other people who have worked with headliners who are like, you can't sell merch. And that's insanity.
What's the logic behind that?
The logic is that the opener would be cutting into that headliner's merch profits. Now, if you're selling the same thing, okay, then you economically, yes, you're in direct competition. But if I'm selling, shirts and stickers in my own album, which is what I sell right now, unless you're selling my shirts, my stickers, and my albums, like, we're good, dude.
Yeah.
If they like the show, they're gonna go to the headliner first. The headliner did more time. The audience generally has a better connection with the headliner. I'm in the middle. Psychologically, they shouldn't remember me. They only remember the beginning and the end.
Yeah.
And I'm in the middle of the whole thing. So, but yeah, so I don't think I would work with a headliner if they told me I couldn't sell merch.
Okay, that made me think. So you were talking about, going on the short trip and then the longer trip, and you want to make sure, it's nice to be with a friend, or if you're taking someone, make sure they're not psycho.
Yeah.
You don't have to name names, but what if you find you're with a psycho? What if you're the feature and the headliner is a raving lunatic or something like that? I don't know if that's happened to either or both of you, but is that the kind of thing where you're like, well, I can't say no, I need the work. I don't know. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, for women, it also has to do with safety. Don't open for a guy. I mean, I'm not saying don't open for a guy, but be aware of a comic's reputation. It's just an added thing that women kind of have to deal with, which is unfortunate. I mean, if they're a lunatic, I'll come in, say hi, and then watch the show. Oh, I want to go see how the host is doing. And so I kind of separate off and then I watch the show. During the day, if they want to hang out, I work. I have this, I have that, I'm busy. But generally, if the guy's a lunatic, you don't have to spend that much time with him if you don't want to. Especially if it's a small green room, you can just be like, I'm gonna go smoke, even if you don't smoke. Like there's just ways to get around it. I don't think I've ever really opened for. I mean, I've people who have been annoying. Yeah, I guess there's been a few annoying people, but I just kind of I'm old, so I'm just like, I'm gonna go do whatever I want. My eggs are dying. Bye. It's just
I'm gonna cling to my last few ovaries.
yes, exactly. But the biggest
Last
one
few
I find is
eggs.
just like, I'm gonna go watch the show. I'm gonna
Yep.
go watch everybody get in. I'm gonna go eat over here. I don't want to be rude, so I'm gonna go eat over here. Just stuff like
Mhm.
that.
Yeah, I think having there's a lot of outs when you are an opener, and I've been grateful that a lot of the people that I've opened for have been fantastic people to be around.
Mm-hmm.
Even if it ends up just being for a short period of time. Like some of the bigger comics, they have other shit they're working on, and they're on the phone, they're in meetings, they're writing a script. They some of them will have an assistant with them, or like they bring their manager along. So it's like, I'm just a very small part in this very large,
Mm-hmm.
well-oiled machine. So, I mean, there have been times where I, yeah, I can't say. I think the worst thing that's sticking out of my mind is like I couldn't go into the green room. That was like during the show, like the headliner got the green room to themselves. That was like part of their terms,
Mm-hmm.
but it didn't make sense to go in the green room because the headliner was chain smoking in the green room the whole time. Like I guess I was in their rider that you can do that. So it's like, all right, it's times like those where it's like it's good to it pays to be like a comedy nerd or just like a due diligence business person. It's like, oh, I'm gonna go set up my merch table. It's gonna take me a while. I'll see you later.
Mm-hmm.
I want to watch what the opener does because they did something different this set, and just like I'm really into the fine workings of stage presence or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Or I'm gonna go write something. But yeah, I've never really been anytime I've been really like dragged along, it's someone who I already had a pretty good relationship with, like going to radio, or like if I really didn't like the headliner, I wouldn't go to radio with them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right. Well, we should probably wrap this up. So, are there any final thoughts, things I didn't ask but should have, things that have popped into your head over the course of our little discussion here?
I would say the biggest thing that helped me on the road when I was starting out was getting a car, which is very unpopular in New York.
Yeah.
But it did help me so much. And knowing that I had a car, I would just put it out there, and then people would ask me to open for them because they needed a ride.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah.
if you're a New Yorker, learn how to drive. At the very least, get your driver's license.
Mhm.
And then B, if you can't afford it, or if you have a car available, make it known that you have a car. Because it literally got me just from point A to point B a lot faster than I deserved. Not I deserved, but
Yeah.
before, it is.
It was an advantage. Let's put it that way.
Yes, it was an advantage. It was a
Yeah.
huge advantage. So I would say that as an opener is huge. And then pick an airline and pick a rental company and get those points, baby. Okay.
Yeah.
Pick a hotel and just stay loyal and get your points.
Yeah, totally. Pick a credit card
Mm-hmm.
like that will get you those benefits. Um, for me it's like, I fly mostly Southwest, so like just racking up, and any this is more like a finance thing, but like anything you buy on the road is a comedy expense.
Mm-hmm.
So, if you put all that stuff on one card, that will also get you points. It's just like it further compounds upon itself. And then because there will come a day where you're asked to do a gig last minute and you may need to fly somewhere, and having those points will make it so you can actually make this gig and not lose a bunch of money.
Mm-hmm.
So the other thing I would say is figure out how you want to be a good hang. Sometimes, like you don't have to hang out for everything, but sometimes you do need to hang for something, and you don't want to be a bummer.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
figure out how to not be a bummer hang. You're
Mm-hmm.
going to be up late sometimes. You're going to be in the middle of nowhere sometimes. You're going to be around people you maybe don't agree with politically, philosophically, people who just rub you the wrong way, but you got to figure out how to navigate that, because you're going to be in some places where that are not comfortable. And figure out what your sleep schedule is going to be like, because you may have to go do that Thursday show and you may party late, but you got to go do radio with that headliner at 6 a.m. So there's a rhythm to it, but if you can survive that rhythm, and you got a good neck pillow, and you know how to put all your stuff in your carry-on, and you learn how to pack light but effectively, you can make this happen.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much both for your time and your expertise. Yeah, that's it.
Thanks for having me.
Always good to see you, Amy. Thank you.
Yes.
Lovely to see you too. All right,
Little
let me
angel.